So when we look at the crash itself, now we begin the interplay of lives of people in New Mexico, in Roswell, where everybody either knew everybody or knew somebody who knew everybody else. It was such a tight-knit community over a fairly wide area, but Roswell at that time was quite a small town. A lot of ranches, the military base, and people interacting with very mundane concerns, and then they all became plunged into this incredible drama, an event that we're still trying to figure out. And first up, the first name that comes to mind whenever I think of the Roswell event, the physical events involved, is rancher Mack Brazel. And with all of your research, Don, over the years, what have you come to learn about Mack Brazel?
Well, he was a very decent, very honest rancher. And we demonstrate in the book that unlike all of the surrounding ranches, the ranchers, Brazel was not the owner of the particular ranch in question. He was the ranch foreman, supervisor. He was responsible for, at that time, 75,000 acres. Just imagine, as far as this high desert region of New Mexico, and even historically, the Lincoln County area, the Lincoln County range wars that took place after the Civil War, and the names such as John Chisholm and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which made that area so famous. Unchanged, it's still ranchers, on horseback, cowboys, herding their cattle and their sheep after, centuries of ranching experience. And Brazel was responsible for that particular ranch. And so if anything should come down, anything should crash, even something as simple as a weather balloon, it was his responsibility to clean it up, clear it off that high open pasture range, because cattle and sheep, like goats, will devour everything in their path. So they've always made sure to clear and keep everything as pristine as possible for the grazing habits of the livestock. Yet this was something else. This was something that it covered such a large area that he couldn't clean it up by himself. It was one of the reasons that not only he reported it, but he would lament the fact that who is responsible? Who's going to come out and clear all of that wreckage away? And for the first 2 days, he spent time going from neighbor to neighbor and into the nearest town, which was Corona, demonstrating, showing some of the wreckage. And from all accounts, from all the people that we've been able to track down and interview who made their way, and you just think, your nearest neighbor is 10 miles away, nearest neighbor. And there were people who were traveling up to 30 miles to grab souvenirs, to grab a piece of this thing. Because, again, it was something no one could identify. No one had ever seen anything like this before. And we're talking about wreckage that covered an area of about 3/4 of a mile. It was fanned in an area of a few hundred feet wide. There was a gouge about 10 foot wide that covered an area of about 300 to 500 feet, and material that was light as a feather, weightless, paper thin, and yet larger pieces you couldn't burn, you couldn't bend, you couldn't drill, you couldn't shoot a bullet through. And witnesses described how they took a 16-pound sledgehammer and pounded on the material, and the hammer would bounce right off. And then other material that was silken, like strands of glass. And you could hold a light up to one end, and the light would emit out the opposing end. Well, that certainly sounds like fiber optics back in 1947.
It does, doesn't it?
Yet fiber optics wouldn't come, into development until around 1970. And then there were I-beam sections about the size of your pinky. These flanges of, again, the same type of metal-like material with hieroglyphic symbology, hieroglyphic-like symbology that ran the length of these strips. And the one material, the most amazing material that we refer to as our Holy Grail, the memory material, the same type of material, but this was flexible. This you could crumble, you could crease, you could wad up into a ball. And when you would place it down onto a smooth surface, it would flow like water. It would just smooth right out. But yet it too, you couldn't burn, you couldn't cut, you couldn't shoot a bullet through. Now, those are the descriptions, the accounts that we've heard from all the witnesses, whether the civilian, military, the press, even away from Roswell. And Brazel, as you described, the very first person to discover that material. And he would report it within a few days to the sheriff of Chavez County, Sheriff George Wilcox, who in turn contacted the 509th Bomb Group at Roswell. And obviously the material must have impressed not only the sheriff and his deputies enough for contacting the base, but keep in mind it's the 4th of July weekend. And it not only alerts the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, to get involved, but he just doesn't dispatch a couple of low-ranked grunts to go check it out. He sends the two head of intelligence, Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett of counterintelligence, to follow the rancher Brazel back to check it out. So, again, response, reaction, like I was describing at the top of the hour, beginning of the show. They're behaving again as though this is something really important, something beyond the realm. And Brazel would take them to the site. The next day, they would gather up enough material to fill up 2 vehicles. Yet, most of the debris would still be out there. Doesn't sound like just a weather balloon that you could toss into the back of the trunk of your car, and that would be the end of it. And they returned to the base. They put out that famous press release where they acknowledged they had actually captured a flying saucer. And within 5 hours, they retract that explanation, and it becomes just a weather balloon. And that would make the banner headlines on the morning of July 9th. The key point is, it's been explained, it's nothing more than a weather balloon. The rancher has made a big mistake, and yet they grab Brazel. They kidnap him. They abduct him. They take him to the base, and they would keep him there for the next 5 days. Keep him up 24 hours a day, asking him questions over and over again. They would not even provide him with due process. He was not allowed to call a lawyer, not allowed to even call his own wife to let her know he was okay and where he was. They subjected him to a full Army physical, including a full body cavity search. Again, this is after the balloon explanation. What were they looking for? Well, of course, they were looking for physical evidence, something that after the fact would blow away that weather balloon explanation, because it'd be something else. And Brazel, when he was returned, he was a broken man. He was a bitter man. He thought he had performed his civil duty, reporting the crash, and yet he would never talk about it again. He wouldn't even talk to it as far as with his own family. His son, Bill Jr., he would say, it's better you don't know. And again, this doesn't, all the behavior, and specifically of Brazel, would suggest that this was something that he, as well as his neighbors, had never seen before, could not identify. The sheriff, the deputies, no one could identify it. The base commander at Roswell, his intelligence officers going up all the way up the chain of command. And they had to come up with this straw man. The creation, the release of the actual crash story, and then the evolution into the weather balloon, the tearing down of that straw man. And it worked. It worked for the next 30 years.